Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to Behind the Book. I'm here with my co-host, Karen. Karen, what's happening with you?
In my writing life or in my personal life?
I'm always curious about your writing life because, I am your greatest fan. So tell me what you're
Oh,
working on.
thank you. I don't write as quickly as you do. And for me, it seems like I do as much time thinking about writing as I do writing. The book I'm working on right now has a lot more twists and turns. And I'm thinking it's a very different kind of project for me than books I've done in the past because I'm writing chapters out of order, which is something I'm usually very linear. I mean, there will be flashbacks or things like that, but it's rare that I reshuffle chapters or scenes, and I'm doing a lot of that right now, which is very different and it's out of my comfort zone. And I'm going through a lot of that self doubt that you and I have talked about, and some of our guests have talked about, where you're like, does this work at all? Will anyone be interested? And one funny thing my son Jack said, I hear you talking a lot more about your podcast than I do about about your writing. Are you still working on books? Are you still writing novels? Like, yes, I am. He's like,
Well, yeah, well, and in fact, I have found just talking to these other authors so inspiring. I think it actually will be very stimulating for us as we go forward because it's just, especially some of these women that we've had on are just such heavy hitters. It's awesome.
oh, they're so impressive. And I think even when they talk about things that I also do, it's something very affirming to go, okay, that's how I handled that problem as well. So it's like, okay, if she's doing it that way, then there's some wisdom to it, because this is an odd kind of job. We sit alone and we make things up. And yeah, I found that doing this podcast has been helping the creative process for me.
Yeah, there's only one thing that's been extremely perplexing to me, and that is how many people answer the question about the superpower as wanting to be invisible. I cannot imagine anything worse than being invisible because then you would hear people say bad things about you
Well, see,
without
now
realizing you're there.
you're like me. You're assuming they're going to say bad things. And if you had more of a narcissistic personality, you'd be like, I can hear them complimenting me when I'm not around.
Yeah, maybe that's what's maybe I need to work on that.
Yeah, you're a little insecure, Tess.
Oh, that's funny. Anyway, well, we had a lot of fun with this episode. We had Liz Talley on, and she's the sweetest, cutest, most adorable person in the world. I want to be her. And she just had so many fun things to share with us. And one thing I loved about her answers is that they always came from a place of such gratitude. All the people who helped her along the way, the gratitude for them and for her readers. She's just such a positive person. I love hanging out with her, and I hope we can have her back at some point.
And I love her accent. She's from Louisiana, and she's just, throws out these little cute expressions. And I could just listen to her all day, quite frankly. But, one thing I did want to mention is one of the acronyms she used was RWA, which most writers are very familiar with, but readers might not be. It's an organization called Romance Writers of America that are really helpful with writers at every stage of the game. I've heard so many authors say that even if they wrote love stories that weren't strictly romance, that they joined just because it was a great way to make connections and learn more about the business and craft of writing. So, and that was certainly true for Liz. She said RWA was really instrumental in connecting her with other authors.
Yeah, and she clearly has a gift with networking and has just such a great personality that I think it is something that is an asset to her in this career. Especially, we were talking before we started recording that, most authors tend to be introverted, and she is the exception for sure, in that she's so outgoing and has so many friendships.
She's a people person for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone's going to really enjoy hearing what she has to say about her books and about writing and life.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, we're on to the interview. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Behind the Book. Today we're interviewing Liz Talley, who is a USA Today bestselling author of over 30 heartwarming stories. She was a finalist in both RWA's Golden Heart and Rita Awards. Very impressive. Liz makes her home in Louisiana, where she likes to read, volunteer, and avoid housework. Her stories are set mostly in the South, where the tea is sweet, the summers are hot, and the porches are wide. Welcome, Liz. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank y'all so much for letting me come on. It's exciting to be here with y'all. I'm looking forward to answering some questions and talking about writing and books.
We'd love to know more about your background, particularly your transformation from English teacher to best-selling author. Can you tell us how your writing career began and how many books have you written to date?
Sure. So I was an English teacher for about 8 years. I tried being a stay at home mommy for about 3 or 4, and I did that, but I really missed being in the classroom. I really missed working with students. So I went back and worked as a GED teacher. I basically helped people get their GED, and that was really lovely working in adult education. And then I just started dabbling a little bit with writing. And so it was really a hobby of mine. I loved reading romance books. They were very comforting to me. I always call them my mac and cheese of the fiction world because you know that there's going to be a happily ever after. And they always were uplifting and just, made me feel warm and gooey. So I loved reading them. And I just thought, why not try writing them? So I kind of did it for a hobby. And then I just loved it so much. I started searching out and finding some local writers in my area. And then I was like addicted, and I'm a sort of competitive person. So as soon as I figured out like I like doing this, I really wanted to get published. So I began just really, really working toward like going to conferences and entering contests and getting lots of feedback on my work. And then all of a sudden one day I got a call from Super Romance. My editor was a senior editor, Wanda Ottewell, and she wanted to work with me, and we worked together on 15 books. Well, 14 books for Super Romance. And then I did 1 or 2 for Blaze. And I had a different editor for that. And then I've just kind of moved on into women's fiction. So I think I've published 30 books. My 31st will be in January. But the deal is that some of them are novellas, but they're still published. That's my published work. So I have a couple of that were novellas.
So, you started out with romance and now you're sort of transitioning into women's fiction. What do you think your focus is going to be going forward?
Well, Karen, I really love writing women's fiction. I think it's just the place I am in my life. Not that, romance is dead necessarily, but the issues that I'm dealing with, I now have an empty nest. So I have 2 boys. My oldest just graduated from the University of Arkansas, and he's going to be working on his master's. And then my youngest completed his freshman year at Louisiana State University, LSU. So yeah, so I'm got an empty nest. My husband and I are childhood sweethearts. We've been together forever, but we're also kind of like, it's just that change in life when you move from really parenting to having this time to yourself. And so I think it kind of like at the same time that I was shifting from being just a mom and just a romance writer, shifting into dealing things with like my mother had a stroke this year. Some of the things that women in their 40s and 50s and 60s began to deal with older children and older parents. And I just felt like that was a natural progression to move into writing about those kind of subjects. So I really, really want to continue writing women's fiction. That being said, I have a couple of series that I'm re-releasing from Super Romance that I'm kind of brushing up. So those rights came back to me since Super Romance is a defunct line and doesn't exist. And I really love those stories. So I'm reinventing those stories just a little bit. I'm toning down a lot of the sexiness so that my readers who read women's fiction and they still read romance can still enjoy those books without them being a little too racy. They're still sensual, but I'm kind of closing the door. I'm opening the door, I'm pulling it out, and I'm closing the door again in a nice way. Um, but I kind of like doing that because it just fits me better where I am right now. So I'm doing that, and I want to write a couple more stories in some of my series. I have a series I love that's a romance series called Morning Glory. And it kind of borders a little bit on women's fiction because it's about friendship and about this town and community, but they are love stories. They are romances. But I really love those stories. And I kind of like to go back to Morning Glory. A lot of my readers really like those books. And so I want to write some stories in that. Right now, I'm not actively writing anything. I'm being a bit of a lazy bones. So, but I am waiting on copy edits for my January book, and I'm just kind of brainstorming and thinking about my next project. I'm not exactly sure what I want to write. It hasn't come to me yet.
It will.
Well, your most recent novel, Adulting, was chosen to be an Amazon First Reads. So awesome. Can you share how you got the idea for that story and how the writing played out for you in that book?
Sure. That book was a little one off for me. So I tend to tout myself as a Southern writer. I write books about the South, as you read in my bio. And this one, for some reason, I stayed in California. So it's a little one off for me because I usually write all of my books in the South. I'm not exactly sure. I had intended to go from California and I really wanted to bring my characters to Texas. But in actually doing the writing, because I needed a road trip for them, I realized that if I put them on a long road trip to Texas and put them in the South, that I was kind of like, there was a little Arthur intrusion. I wanted to put them in the South because I know the South, but it didn't really make sense in the context of the book. So as I wrote it, I just left them. They went up to Northern California, to this cabin in Northern California. And it was a derelict, kind of rundown cabin that was kind of part of, the whole thing is that there's an adulting boot camp in this book. And these two characters, two women, one is a life coach and one is a Hollywood actress who is kind of down and out. She's spent most of her life, in and out of drug rehab. She was very talented as a child, but she's run into some issues. So I wanted to put them in a situation where they had to kind of be isolated, but also in a community. And so my intention was to bring them south, which is what I know, but it just didn't work out. And so after I finished it and I finished all the copy edits and I finished the proofreading and everything was done, the cover was done, it was ready to roll. I realized that I just stepped outside my branding, which was kind of crazy. But I still think it's very much a Liz Talley book. And I got the idea basically from the actress part. I'm always intrigued by actors and actresses, especially those who were, child actors. And what's interesting to me is that often, they have issues going from being a children in Hollywood to adults. And some of them do fine, but a lot of them do not do well. And so I wanted to explore that. And my whole idea was that if I could just put them in a normal situation, and that's how I came up with adulting, a life coach who basically them through paces and help them grow up and challenge them by making them a normal person with all the things that we do every single day that challenge us, inform us, that a lot of people in Hollywood or child celebrities, maybe child tennis players or ballerinas, or all these children that were like phenoms. They just don't have the life that we had growing up. So I wanted to kind of challenge. So that's kind of how I came up with the idea. It's kind of just an idea about how to essentially become an adult and how you go through that process. And so that's what I have my therapist Olivia put Chase through.
And what's interesting is that this book was out of your comfort zone, not being set in the South, and your characters were out of their comfort zone. There's some
Exactly. That's a good point. That's
yeah,
true.
some nice synchronicity there. So you couldn't
Yeah.
you couldn't have them say y'all or good gravy or any of the things
Right.
that
No.
you would
No
normally
good
say.
grace.
I noticed that several of your books are Christmas stories, and I wondered if you have a love of Christmas books. Are there any particular challenges writing those types of stories?
Well, quite honestly, this is going to sound terrible, but I don't love Christmas books. I know that readers love Christmas books. So I have written them because I know readers enjoy them, but I myself rarely read Christmas books. I don't really know why. It's just, I guess it's just not my preference. I have great Christmases, and I guess I feel fulfilled through my own Christmases. I don't feel like I have to, I don't know, seek out others, but I do have some Christmas stories. I did a book for Hallmark. I really love that story. It's about a Nashville music star who's put through his paces, and he's a songwriter, and he basically goes home, and then there's a science teacher who lives next door, and it was just a real sweet country fun book to write. I've
And
written a really
what was that one called?
a down home Christmas, and so that tells you exactly what it is. It's set in Mississippi, and it's actually set. What's really nice about that book is I put a lot of Easter eggs in it from my other series. So it has a character from Come Home to Me, which is my South Carolina book, and then it has several characters or mentions of characters from my Morning Glory series. So it was kind of fun. I actually was able to borrow a little bit from my other stories. So if you read a lot of Liz Talley books, the readers who like to read my books, they probably recognize that in A Down Home Christmas. And then I did a really cool story with Kim Law and Terry Osborne called Cowboy for Christmas. And it was really cool because the way we did that is we took three characters, three best friends, and there's a wedding, and it's at Christmas, and it's in Texas. It's got all the great tropey, wonderful things that people love. And we wrote it together. So we have some of the same scenes in our books. I mean, in our stories. So it's three connected novellas. And I really like that because I was able to, I think we did like three or four scenes where it was the same scene in each story, but it was through a different character's eyes. So that was really fun to write. I enjoyed that a lot. And we collaborated on that one. And readers really liked that one too. And then, of course, I have a few that were with Super Romance. I wrote some Christmas stories for Super Romance. So I think I have like three or four, maybe five.
So how did that come about that you wrote with the two other authors?
Yeah, well, it was really kind of cool because Kim Law and we finaled, I think in the bio it read, we finaled in the Golden Heart, which was an unpublished contest that RWA used to have. And it was kind of a big deal if you finaled in it because it kind of meant you were on the cusp of maybe publication. Like you had the writing chops necessary to final in a contest, this big contest. We became very close. We were called the Ruby Slippered Sisterhood. We're actually still called that. We still do some things together. But Kim and I became close in that. And then Terry was a finalist the next year with Kim in the following year. And so Terry, she became good friends with Terry, and she just kind of had the idea of pulling people who write. So we write very similarly. If you read those authors, if you read Kim Law, you read Terry Osborne, we write basically, we're kind of the same writer. Our voices are similar, our moods, our tones, the things we write about are the same. So Kim just said, I think it'd be cool to write something together. And she wanted to do a connected series. And she wanted all the big buzzes. She said, I think it needs to be Cowboys in Texas and Christmas and wedding. She goes, those are all the things that sell, like, big time, for romance readers. So we decided to do all of them together because, go big or go home. So we did that. Each took a character. They were three best friends. One was getting married. And we just kind of basically worked together. We created a private Facebook page where we talked about our characterization. And then I think I wrote the first story. And then after I wrote my story, they read it and they would go back and say, well, my character wouldn't say that, or she would never do that, or, that sort of thing. And so I would go and fix it. And then they would write their stories. And because they had read mine, then they would, we chose like three scenes. We had like a bar scene, I think a wedding shower, a parade, and like the end of the book, where they all, were together. The girls were together. So our dialogue had to be the same in each story, but from a different point of view. So really, really fun to write that story. And we had a good time with it. I don't think we would do it again because it's very time consuming, but it created a really cool story for the readers. Because if you read all three of them, you kind of know what's going to happen, but you don't know what's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of a cool thing to do. And I really am glad that I got the chance to do that with them. They're very talented writers.
So if somebody is unfamiliar with your work, which would you suggest they read first?
Oh, heavens. That's kind of tough. Well, I'm a big fan of like read the newest book first. I just think like I believe that as a writer, I have gotten better as I've progressed, as I've written. I think my stories have become stronger. I think my characterization has become stronger because I'm writing in women's fiction right now. I really think I write complicated, sometimes unlikable characters. Most of the times they're likable. They're very redeeming. For adulting, which is my latest book, I had many people tell me that they didn't like Chase when it started, but Chase is unlikable. She's unlikable because, she has a drug addiction problem, an alcohol problem, she has an attitude problem. So she's not super likable. But as it goes on and you find out more about her and you find out what has happened to her and why she is like that, you began to sympathize with her and you began to care for her. And then you begin to watch her change. And for that girl inside that had been lost for so long, overshadowed by her career and by her mother and by the expectations that she has, it becomes a beautiful story to watch somebody find themselves. In this book, Chase finds herself and she owns herself. She owns her mistakes, but she owns who she wants to be. So I would say absolutely start with adulting. I also think the book before that, The Wedding War, is a really fun kind of romp book. It's about a mother of bride and mother of the groom, who were childhood friends who now hate each other, and their children are getting married. So they have to do the wedding season together. So there's plenty of good conflict, and it's kind of, I think, a romp, and my version of like a Still Magnolias, where some of the characters can do some things that are a little ugly or a little puzzling, but in the end, you realize that friendship's going to win out. So I really like that one too. So I think oftentimes it's good to start with whatever the author's done lately, because that usually that's a good place to start. But if people like romance, I would definitely say my Morning Glory series. Start with the Pink Book, which is Charmingly Yours, and that's a nice little romantic series. So but yeah, I think I would just say start with adulting and then read all the rest.
Every single one.
One of them.
Can you tell us about your writing process? How much of your books do you know ahead of time when you start writing?
Well, I usually sell it on synopsis to my publisher. And so I kind of know what the story is going to be. Somewhat know what it's going to be. I iron out the plot, the different arcs that I want my characters, what I want my characters to kind of learn. I do what writers call goal, motivation, conflict. What do my characters want? Why do they want this? What's going to stand in their way? And, I really kind of examine that. Oftentimes what I find out is what I think is going to happen doesn't necessarily happen. But usually I know that after 4 or 5 chapters of writing, I realize, well, what I thought, that's not going to work. And I know y'all as writers kind of know that too. A lot of times you realize that character's not going to do that. That's not who she is, because that character comes alive as you're writing. So I have a pretty good idea, but I never hold myself to a really firm synopsis. I never, just like I told y'all when I realized, I couldn't make them go to Texas, I'm not going to let my desires as a writer overshadow what needs to happen for the characters in the story. My characters have to live out who they are in a story. So I'm never going to force my will on them. When I realize a character's not going to, they're not going to go to Texas, that doesn't make sense. I'm just trying to put that in there so I'm comfortable, as you said, Karen, with writing this. I'm not going to do that, because I'm going to let the story happen in a very natural, organic way as it needs to happen for characters. So I never really stick totally to my synopsis.
What parts of writing fiction are easy for you? And do you have any Achilles heels or things that are hard for you?
Well, I used to say conflict was always hard for me, because I could fall in love with my characters. And I used to write with a friend who would always say, so what? Because I would say, oh, and she's going to do this. And then she'd say, why? And I'd be like, well, because she likes it. She's like, so what? It would drive me nuts, because she would just challenge me on why are your characters doing what they're doing? And what's the conflict? Why doesn't she just tell him this? Why are you hiding behind, things you've dreamed up so that you can make it be what you think it ought to be? So I think, at a time conflict was harder for me. I think it's become easier as I've written women's fiction. And I'm not exactly sure why. I'm sitting here telling you all this and I'm like, I don't even know why it's become a little bit easier. I think coming from that romance background where I wanted I couldn't let there be dead space on the page. When I go to women's fiction, I'm not the kind of women's fiction writer who has a lot of exposition. I like a lot of action. I like a full plot. So my editors always say your book reads fast. I might have a big book, like the book I turned in with that's deconstructed that's coming out in January was over 100,000 words, which is a pretty decent sized book. But my editor's like, I don't think you need to change anything. It reads so fast. And that's because I like my plot to go. I don't want to spend a lot of time on exposition. I don't want to navel gaze. I don't love my words so much that I'm going to stick a lot of prose in there. So I think my weakness now, if I'm thinking about my Achilles heel in regards to like crafting stories, is sometimes I don't see something that's obvious. I miss things. I don't see the forest for the trees. So sometimes I have to really put that manuscript aside and then come back at it from a different angle. I think my strengths are I write fun characters. I'm able to inject humor pretty easily. I'm a pretty funny, fun-loving person. I like to make jokes. I come from a family where we tease each other a lot, so I like writing funny things. My gold standard, I think I mentioned it before, is still Magnolias. I want to feel the feels. I want to laugh at the funny characters. I want to build community, and I want to build characters that you can't forget. Quirky, fun, layered, authentic, sometimes unlikable characters. Those are my absolute favorite.
And then when you talked about the times that you get stuck, what do you do on a day when you wake up and you just aren't feeling it? Do you plow ahead and write anyway, or how do you approach that?
I usually eat too much and go shopping. Let's just be honest. I don't force myself a lot. That being said, I'm not a huge believer in true writer's block. I think usually if you're having writer's block, there's something in the story that's not working. And so you're avoiding it for that reason. And you don't want to go undo something and have to put in the work because that's how we are as humans. So I think a lot of times when you say, "Oh, I just have this, writer's block and I can't write," it's because something's wrong with your story and you don't know what it is, or you know what it is and you don't want to do anything about it. Writers can be stubborn that way because we hold tight to visions and we think that's my vision and that's what it's got to be. But if you hold so fast and so tight to it that you can't change the story, you're going to lose opportunity to make it a better story. So a lot of times I don't force it. A lot of times I talk to my friends. I might talk to y'all. I might say I'm having an issue. Um, and we work it out or somebody makes a suggestion. I have some writing friends and we plot and plod is what we say. We will walk and we talk about the issues. And oftentimes, I don't know if this is true for you, Tess and Karen, but if I can talk about my story to someone, if I can just tell them what's going on, I figure it out on my own. If somebody will just listen to me say, okay, now this is what's going to happen, and here's where I have the trouble, and then you say, well, why doesn't she do this? I'm like, oh no, she can't do that, and then I talk about why she can't do that, and then I'm like, oh, I know what she needs to do. So it's wonderful to have writer friends to just talk your plot out, even if they're not even making suggestions other than why are you doing that? Because if you talk about it yourself, you usually figure out what you need to do.
Do you ever have doubts about a book, like either while you're writing it or after it's finished?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we all have doubts as we're writing. I think if you're not now, we know there are stories that roll off our fingers. There are stories that, the wedding war for me was a very easy story to tell. I knew those women very intimately because they were parts of both of me. Tennyson and Melanie. who are these opposite women. Tennyson is very flamboyant. She's what I call extra. Everything she does is over the top. Everything is very dramatic. And Melanie is very like even killed PTA volunteer. She, runs everything in their family. Everything's done correctly, but she's suffering from a lack of like feeling appreciated or, and really lack of friendship. So those women I knew, I can write those women. And that book flew out of my fingertips. And it's that magic that we as writers sometimes have when you're writing a scene and it's going and you don't even realize that it's coming out of you the way it is. That's how that book was written. Some books are my husband's a dentist and I feel like I do his job. It's like pulling teeth, wrestling with those characters, trying to make them behave, trying to make them, it's difficult sometimes. So, yeah, there are times that I have doubts. I worry, can this story work? But, I think I'm an intuitive writer. And so I usually know when I'm forcing something and I back off of it and come at it in a new direction. And what I'm really excited about doing here in the future is, and I have doubts about this because we all have doubts, but I really want to write some more indie books in my Morning Glory series. And what scares me about that is it's all up to me. I mean, it's okay. I got to come up with a storyline. I got to come up with these. I got to revisit this town. It's going to be a lot of work, and so that's kind of daunting because it's sometimes easier to write for a publisher. You tell them your story. They give you the cover. You've got an editor to bounce idea. I mean, it's all them. When you're an indie author, it's just you. So I'm a little afraid. I won't say afraid. I'm determined to do it. I'm determined to learn, but I'm a little bit nervous about that venture, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I really want to revisit that series and I want to be able to do some indie stuff. I want to be able to take things in directions where I want to go. I don't want it to be something that publishers are trying to shoehorn me into something. And that's the beauty of indie. And I think I'm strong enough to do that. And I think I could be successful at doing that. I hope and pray I am. But yeah, I think we all have doubts about books, and I'm no different. I try to be confident about my work because I think that's always important to believe in yourself and to believe that you can do things. But I'm not so stupid that I'm overconfident or think that I'm something I'm not. I'm always trying to learn more and I'm always trying to get better at my craft and get better at everything I do as a writer. I think my readers deserve that.
Absolutely. But I have no doubt that you can write some indie books and they'll be a huge success. I don't think that you'll have a problem at all.
Well, thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. See, that's why I need you gals. I need
Oh,
you to tell me you can do it.
oh, you absolutely can do it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
my
it's
big
a no-brainer. Yeah.
my biggest problem when I revisit, like you're talking about a series you did previously, is remembering all the details. So you're going to have to go back and
I
do some
know.
rereading, unless your memory is better than mine.
No, my memory's not great. I actually was thinking, you're going to have to pick up those books and reread those books, which is odd to reread something that you kind of know what's going to happen. But it's funny. Sometimes I enjoy because I forget the things that I wrote. I know y'all are probably like this too.
Mhm.
Every now and then, you pick up a book because someone's like, can you send me an excerpt from this or give me something, and I read it. I'm like, oh, I wrote this. You forget like you enjoyed that part or, oh, I forgot that I wrote that she did or said that. And it's kind of cool to go back on our own things and remember the joy we had when we wrote particular scenes and, those ideas and take yourself back to that time. That maybe it'll be cooler than what I think it will be. But
So when you're done with a manuscript, how do you know when the book is finished? When do you say it's done?
oh, yeah. Well, sometimes I think a lot of writers just keep going and going and going. A lot of times I can tell if I've gone too long. I'm like, you got to finish this. Like this has got to wrap up. You can't throw everything in there. I have a tendency to want it all, right? So I want to throw everything in there. But yeah, I usually know like where I'm rolling to. I think that synopsis keeps me kind of knowing, as I was writing adulting, I knew the outcome for Chase. I knew what had to happen for her. And a lot of times I write myself into a corner. And I kind of did a little bit in that book because I didn't really know what was going to happen at the end. And so I talked that out with my friends and then figured out how I was going to end it. I've had a couple of complaints about my ending, that it was too romancy. But I liked the way that this particular book ended. I think it was what Chase needed. So I don't know if it was what the reader needed, because readers bring their own perspective to stories. But I think it was what Chase needed in her life at that moment. So I really liked the way that I ended it. I thought it was a very sweet ending. So some writers may not have liked it because it was sweet, but I liked it. I liked ending it that way. So yeah, I usually kind of know when to end it and where I'm gonna stop.
Do you have an ideal reader in mind when you write?
Um, I would like to say someone who's similar to myself, someone who is okay, I know from Amazon, from examining who reads my books, what age group, what gender, what even where they live. Amazon gives us that information. So I know most of my readers are over the age of 50. A lot of them are in their 60s. So, which makes sense because those are women, and most of them are women. I do have a lot of male readers who are very dedicated to reading my books. And I love that, that I have this kind of male contingency that, they weigh in and they send me notes and letters and let me know. So I think they said of romance readers, about 10% are men. For women's fiction, I would gather it might be about the same. And I like to think those men like to read our stories because what they give men is often just suspense and horror and maybe action. And there are a lot of men that enjoy reading about relationships. So I know who is reading my books, but my ideal reader is always someone like me, someone who is where I am in my life, with my children kind of grown, my parents, getting older, and life being less. The things that I thought that were so important are not so important anymore. So that there's a lot of heart and validity to what I'm writing and what readers recognize in my words. So I always kind of think I'm writing to a woman who is like me, ideally, and I kind of write sometimes to please myself too. So
Mm.
I probably shouldn't say that. I want to please the readers, but if I'm writing to the reader who is myself, I think that means I'm writing to please myself.
Makes sense to me.
Mhm.
When you settle down to write, do you have a favorite area or space in your house that you like to work in?
Well, honestly, I usually sit on my couch. It's the hub of my house. My children are usually not there. Like I said, we're empty nesters. My husband goes to work, so I have the house to myself. But here in the summer, well, it hasn't been too bad. My boys are working and they sleep later, so I'm still able to kind of have the couch to myself. But it's close to the coffee pot, and it's close to letting my dog out in the backyard because he has to go chase a squirrel, and it's kind of comfortable. I can turn on the echo and put on the music that I like in the background, and I like that. But I'm not necessarily attached. I can almost write anywhere: airport, hotel room. I write at my camp sometimes on the pier. I can lose myself in story pretty easily, so I'm not super attached.
And you listen to music while you write. I can't do that. With lyrics or
Yeah,
just
I used to not be
instrumental?
able to. It's in the background. I don't turn it very loud. If it's loud, I'll start singing along. But if
Mhm.
I can just hear a little melody, I used to write with nothing, and I couldn't understand how people wrote with music either. But I just find myself, and I don't do it all the time, but sometimes I find myself, I want to light a candle, I want to put on a little music, fix my coffee, set it down, like setting the mood, like the romantic mood for writing. I like to do that a little bit, but I don't always have it, but I can. Sometimes I just want it to be instrumental, and I'll put on something jazzy and fun, but most of the time most of the time, you know what it is? It's mellow 70s gold. That's what it is. I listen to 70s music.
Okay, that's funny. Oh, so does your family read your books? I'm guessing probably not your
Um,
young adult sons, right?
no, they don't read them, and they were teased, when they were in, middle school and high school about their mother being a romance writer. As people like to call me the writer of trashy books, which is a horrible thing to say about someone's work. So I would always correct my friends. They'd be like, "Oh, she writes those trashy books." I'm like, "They're not trashy. They're books about women falling in love, and that's not trashy." But yeah, they were teased a little bit, and my husband has never read one of my books, which is cool. That's fine because he's not a big reader. He likes to read biographies of rock stars and whatever sports people, and he really loves music a lot. I'm actually in his music room right now talking, surrounded by all of his guitars and things. But yeah, so nobody really reads them. My mom reads most of my books, but she had a stroke back in December, and I don't think she's read Adulting. She was reading it when she had her stroke, and it affected her speech and a little bit of her memory. It didn't affect her really physically. It actually affected her use of words, and her reading is a little stilted still. And so I think she has a little more trouble. And I was thinking, I need to like check into Audible for her. I was thinking I should get her an Audible because she likes to read, but I think now it's kind of challenging for her. So she was my only one who read my books, and now I'm like left with no one.
That's if anything ever happens to my mother, I'll be the same way.
Yeah.
My husband has never read any of my books either. So, and when you said the types of books your husband likes to read, I was connecting with that. Greg likes anything World War II, or just it would not be a novel like mine.
Yeah, my husband loves he reads all the biographies of all the rock stars. I should get him to
Oh.
read Adulting. It's about an actress who has drug problems. All those musicians have drug problems. Isn't that different?
You're halfway there.
Yeah, that's right.
For any listeners who are aspiring writers, do you have advice for them? Something you wish someone had told you, maybe?
Oh, goodness. Well, I had terrific support. I've always had terrific support. I think in the community that we exist in, writers are very supportive of one another, and that's a blessing because we do this by ourselves at a desk or at a computer, writing our stories, and it's wonderful to have people behind you who are supporting you and giving you good advice and steering you in the right direction and sharing your books and things like that. So I've always been blessed. I think the biggest thing I can tell people that I see in other writers when I work with other writers, and I've taught a lot of younger writers and beginning writers over the years through my local chapter and doing workshops. I think the biggest thing I would say is you need to finish the book. So many people love to start a story and they love their story for the first 5 or 6 chapters, and then they get a new idea and they're so excited about that new idea that they chase that. And so they genre chase, they don't stay in the same genre. They're constantly hopping around different genres. When they're starting out, I think that's hard. I think, like, when you're starting out, pick what you really think you're good at writing. Because here's the deal, I wrote historicals. I love historicals. And that's what I like to read. And my first 2 books I wrote were historicals. And then my next one was a contemporary, and it was just on a whim. I really wanted to be a historical romance writer. But my voice was very different, and my talent lie in writing contemporary heroines that were relatable to women today. And I think that's, we talked about my strengths. Writing those characters, I think, is my strength. So I think you have to look at what you're good at. What are you good at writing? And then I think you need to invest your time in writing in that genre. And I think you need to finish a book in that genre and then maybe finish another one in that genre. And that's not saying you can't switch, because obviously I'm writing in women's fiction. And Karen, you love to go into different genres and write in different
I do.
genres. But I think probably when you were starting out, you wrote in one particular genre that you became good at before you started thinking, oh, maybe I want to go do this, or maybe I want to do this, or maybe I want to write a paranormal, maybe I want to write a whatever. Um, so I think finish a book. That's important. Finish the whole entire, all the way till you type the end. And then you can go back and learn on that book. And don't be upset if that book never sees the light of day other than you and your critique partner, because I wrote 2 complete books that will never see the light of day, but I learned the important things on those books. I learned how to write a book. I learned, how I sanitized everything because someone told me I used too much. And then I realized I edited my voice out, and I just learned all the things I need to learn. So don't be disappointed if your first book doesn't sell. It might. Plenty of people sell their first books, or publish their first books, and they're absolutely fine. But it's okay if you don't, if you basically just learn on that first book. So I encourage people to finish the book and then write another. I mean, that's my biggest piece of advice.
Who's been your biggest supporter as you built your craft and publishing career?
Well, I mean, as I said, the romance community is very, very helpful and very supportive. Um, if I'm going to think of it in a way personally that supports me, definitely my mom always came to all my book signings. She would drag people in to force them to buy my books. She brought one lady from a salon, like down to Barnes and Noble. And I was like, Mom, why did you do that? She goes, Well, she said she liked to read. And I said, My daughter's having a book signing. So I just brought her on down here. Um, so she's been a tremendous supporter of my work. My friend Phyllis Caskey, she comes to every book signing. She shares every post that I share about my writing. She walks me. She's one of my plotter and plotters. She's incredibly supportive, and she just, I mean, probably one of my biggest supporters, absolutely, is Phyllis. And then for a career standpoint, I've had a lot of friends that have helped me along the way. I can pinpoint specifically where my career took a better trajectory, and that happened with my Rita final. And one of the people who helped me so much there was Kristan Higgins. She read that story and she emailed me about that story, and she recommended that story to her friends to read. Robyn Carr specifically, she recommended it to Robyn, and then Robyn reached out to me after she read it, and she essentially for about a year or two was sort of a mentor. I mean, I don't think she would officially call herself a mentor, but she really helped me in the business, understanding who I was in the business. I'm incredibly grateful for her because she endorsed me. And then when Come Home to Me came out, she allowed Amazon to basically, made an endorsement for me, and it went out to all of her readers that she endorsed me as an author in that book. And really, because of Kristan and because of Robyn, that changed my career path because I sold a lot of Come Home to Me because of Robyn Carr. And then we still email each other and talk. She's an incredible supporter of other writers. And I think that's because she experienced that too, and she waited a lot of years before she was able to really break out with Virgin River. I mean, when Virgin River broke out, she was set, but she gives back, and Kristan gives back. And you see that over and over. Those two women probably made the biggest difference in my career. And then, I have, writers like y'all. I have your Book Escape authors that we're all a group, part of a group. I mean, I feel tremendous support. I'm able to have questions answered by people who know, who are knowledgeable. I have another group that I talk to every morning. We call ourselves a deadline group, and that's Jamie Beck and Sonali Dave and Tracy Brogan, Virginia Cantra, Priscilla Oliveris, Falguni Kothari. Who am I leaving out? Oh, Sally Kilpatrick. I think I'm leaving someone out. Barbara Samuels, Barbara O'Neill. Just fantastic writers who I talk to them every morning, and we really encourage each other, and we know each other, what we're working on. I'm incredibly blessed by them. They're not afraid to tell me when I'm doing something wrong. They're not afraid to kick me in my butt. They're not afraid to share my posts, and we support each other. And that's a blessing. And so, gosh, I mean, did I give you enough? I can keep going. I can tell you tons of people that are my supporters and who have held me up when, I wanted to just quit. And there's plenty of times that writers want to quit. You just think, why am I doing this? Why am I, it's exhausting. And you put a story out there and you love it and you just think it's wonderful. And then, the reviews aren't good, or readers don't like it, or you don't get the publisher support. And that's hard. That's really, really tough. And so I feel so blessed to have the support that I have. I can't even tell you. I wish, I mean, I'm sure people can kind of tell through this, but if I could pour it out somewhere and bottle it, we'd have enough for the world, enough gratitude for the world.
Have you ever had someone with the pendulum swinging the other way, who's maybe said something that was discouraging to you? Because I'm thinking of like when I started out, agent rejections,
Yeah.
or where you just think, no, you're wrong. I'm going to keep trying, you know?
Right. Well, let me tell you about my worst rejection. You want to hear it? It happened on
Yes.
my birthday. And this was
No.
back when we used to send the self-addressed stamped envelopes to agents. And so I got 3 agent rejections on my birthday. And one of them was just written on the back of my envelope. They didn't even put a letter inside the envelope. It just said, scrawled, not for us. And they just sealed the envelope, wrote it on the back of the envelope, and mailed it. They didn't put paper in there. They didn't waste paper on me. So,
Oh.
so yeah, it was really funny because I told my agent, my agent, that story, my current agent now, and she said you should send that person a box of your books and put "not for you."
I love that.
Yeah. I just laughed so loud I scared the cat. She's asleep on the desk. She was like,
I was tempted, but I decided not to be tacky. My mama would tell me, don't be tacky.
That's good advice,
it
actually.
is good advice. Yeah. So, one last question before our bonus round that Karen will do. But I'm always curious what you think the why is for your books. Like, kind of what's your main message, do you think, as a general theme?
Well, my general theme is escapism for women. I'm not trying to write great literature. I say that. I intentionally, if my book came up for a Pulitzer Prize, that is a total mistake because that is not my intention. I don't want something so weighty that it's debatable in a classroom. I want something that a woman or a man, when they are facing life, when they are sitting in a hospital room or they are, weighed under with unpaid bills and they don't know how to fix it, I want to provide escape for them. I want to provide respite, a few hours where you don't think about your mama being sick, you don't think about your son and his legal troubles, you don't think about how you're going to keep the dog out of your neighbor's garden. You just think about that book for a few minutes. You escape into that book or a few hours. And that's what I want to do. That's what my books are about. Yeah, sometimes they make you think. Sometimes they make you cry. Sometimes they make you laugh. But at the heart of it, I'm writing escapism. I'm writing just a break from the hardness of our lives. And that's what books have always been for me. And that's what I want to give to other people.
I love that. So are you ready for our bonus round?
Oh, I'm a little nervous. Oh,
Well, it's something we do at the end of every podcast.
okay,
We
let's
ask
do it. Let's do it.
10 fun questions. I'm just going to blurt them out and you just say the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh, heavens.
So,
Okay.
what is one food that will never get past your lips?
Sardines.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Kate Winslet.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Invisibility.
At the end of your life, what do you hope you'll have accomplished?
Raising kind children.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
A cashier at Walmart.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
A poker player.
Oh, that's an interesting one. What's your favorite scent?
Suntan lotion.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Oh, I don't do terrifying things. I don't have an answer. I really don't do terrifying things.
Oh, well, that's an answer. When people mispronounce words, do you let them know?
Rarely. Just my children.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Hell yeah, I love my life.
That's a good note to end the podcast on.
Definitely. All right. Well, this has been so much fun. We're really appreciative of your time. And I know our listeners will enjoy hearing more about your journey and your books.
I really loved being here. I could talk to you guys all day long. We should just do this on the regular. It's fun.
Yes.
We'll make a point to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Liz.
All right. Thank you guys. I
All right.
appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comments section. This has been Behind the Book.